Frontier. It's not this big. It's this big. It's a normal 6x9 book, about 250 pages, very well printed and bound as a thing, as an item. Cover design has a watercolor image that looks like a horizon line, which is similar to a suggestion I put together myself, the idea of a frontier being over, over the next horizon. And serendipitously, the designers chose this. I'm pretty sure they were aware of my art by then, which, as many of you know, is watercolor and sumi ink, but large scale abstract modern art. And so some people might have the mistaken idea that I painted this cover, but I did not. Somebody else did, and it was just serendipity that it happened to be similar to my art. The dust cover has blurbs from Grace Shireson, Brad Warner, different luminaries in the Zen universe who were kind enough to endorse it. And Norm Fisher wrote an introduction. We sent out an initial email blast this morning, which was sent to about 150 people, my personal close contact list. And then I sent it to all of the people who wrote blurbs and contributed as well for them to forward to their list if they so desire. And to David Chadwick, who's posting it on Cuke.com, which is his site that promotes his book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Or no, rather, I'm sorry, that was the students. It was his was called Crooked Cucumber. That's why it's called Cuke.com. And so he volunteered to post it on there. He has visited us. One of our priests went out drinking beer with him after his visit. I missed that opportunity, unfortunately. So he's become kind of a friend, and I've met these others, Ben and Brad. Brad Warner's been here. So they've been kind enough to write very nice blurbs, and Norm Fisher's forward to me is very touching. I mean, he's just a great writer, and the way he captured the essence of this unknown Matsuoka lineage coming out of left field, one of the earliest in America, 1939. And then he complimented me by saying he thinks I'm also a pioneer, but we have a special class of pioneers, including Matsuoka Roshi, Suzuki, Katagiri. There were so many of them who came over before and after the war. And they were the real pioneers of planting the seed of Zen in America. And we intend to honor them in the video documentary that we're putting together on Matsuoka. So there will be a montage or something of that sort somewhere in the film that shows this sort of diaspora of teachers coming over from Japan on a mission, really, a mission to America. So what I thought we'd do today is just kind of a casual introduction of this. And those of you who buy the book and would like me to speak more about certain sections that you run across in future talks on the fourth Sunday, I thought I would feature this book through March. This week, first week of March, is the so-called push week, the publishers call it. And so we're doing everything we can to get the word out and get on all the social media. And I have the wonderful support of John Mitchell, Randy Earl, April here, Fusatz, so many, Andrew Dietz, so many people who are savvy online who have helped make this launch a success, to the point that Amazon is already sold out. And who knows how many, they may have only had 100 copies or 50 copies, who knows. But we had to send the email again, and John quickly revised it this morning to also include the Red Feather site. So if you go online, or you get the email and go to purchase the book, if you go to Amazon, it's temporarily out of stock. So the other link lets you go to the Red Feather site, or you can buy it direct from the publisher. So today I thought what we'd do is I would ask you to make a note, have a piece of paper and just jot down or keep a mental note. I'm just going to read the chapter titles. And then I'm going to ask you to say, I'd like to hear something from this chapter and read me the chapter. tell me which one. And then I will read a snippet, like the first paragraph or something from that. If somebody else wants something from that chapter, I'll read something further. But maybe that way, in the time we have with about 15, 20 people, we may be able to touch on each of your requests. So I'm like the folk singer who takes requests. I think it was Gordon Lightfoot used to do this. He would say, people would say, do you take requests? And that's usually covers. You're covering somebody else's song. And so he would say, okay, what do you want me to do? And somebody would say, well, do you know the Beatles, Here Comes the Sun? He'd say, or they'd say, Beatles, Here Comes the Sun. And he'd say, I don't know that one. And somebody else would say, how about John Prine's, sorry, I don't know that one either. And after 5 or 6 of these, people got the idea. He doesn't do requests. He's there to do his songs. But I'm going to do requests, but it's going to be from my chapters. Okay, so let me read these. Unless anybody has a question to start. That's not clear. Okay, so introducing the original frontier. The foreword by Norm Fisher is really, I think, wonderful. I'd like to read the whole thing, but you can, on site, John put it on site, or Randy did actually. Randy put it on our landing page. So when you go to the website on the landing page, it has the full foreword by Norm Fisher, and it has the blurbs from the other Zen teachers. And then it has testimonials or comments from members of our Soto STO community who read the book in its early draft stages. We ran it through several reading groups, 3 reading groups, I think, and one lasted 4 months. So some of the comments from the people who actually read it, who are practitioners, are there. So I'm not going to read extensively, just little snippets that might give you an idea of what that chapter is about. So the foreword by Norm, introducing the original frontier, designing and so please note down if anything sounds interesting to you. Designing a creative Zen life, differentiating Zen meditation from all the others, finding workarounds for your lousy excuses, deconstructing your senses in the most natural way, embracing non-duality without losing your grip on reality, applying Zen to your life by applying your life to Zen, benefiting from Zen in every way imaginable, following the sages as guides to the frontier of Zen, concluding Zen as if that were possible, and then the original frontier, more commentary on the original frontier, a little more about implications. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over now to Fusatsu, who will facilitate and coordinate and direct your questions to me, or your request. And then if you have any follow-up questions, we'd be happy to answer those if we have time.
Again, folks, as usual, if you have questions or if you have the chapter that you would like to discuss further, please come off of mute and participate. Very interactive discussion this morning. Sensei Shinjin.
I would like to hear more about getting a grip on duality without losing your grip on reality, okay, even though it might be too late.
It's a little different. Embracing non-duality,
yeah,
without losing your grip on reality. Okay, I'll start there. And by the way, in reading this book, you can really start anywhere and read it anywhere. I recommend you leave it by your toilet, not your bed, so you don't read too long. And that you read it and then sit zazen. You go back and read it, sit zazen. In other words, I don't think it's summer reading where you want to try to go on vacation and read it all the way through. It's more like a manual that you can use to supplement or complement your sitting. So to start, let me just, Shinjian, I'll just read the first page. It's about 4 short paragraphs. And then if any, and I can read you the subheadings in here. Or let me do that first. There's the introduction. There's form and emptiness, stillness and motion, always and only coexisting. These are the subheads. See if anything sounds interesting, Shinjian. Zen and relativity, inner and outer, perception and conception, free will and karma. That would be Chi's favorite one. Karma and action, doing and non-doing, observer and observed, relative and absolute, mind and environment, urban and rural, sameness and difference, difference and sameness, beginning and ending, zazen and meditation. So those are the subheads on embracing non-duality without losing your grip on reality. Anything of interest there or just the intro?
Well, it's all interesting. I get started.
Okay. Moving beyond the senses, the whole prior chapter was deconstructing the senses. The larger implications of exploring the original frontier are equally challenging. Having established, one hopes, the radical departure from common sense sensibility that non-dualistic awareness of Zazen brings about, the radical departure from common sense sensibility that non-dualistic awareness of Zazen brings about, we will attempt to expand our horizons. Indulging in speculation can be titillating, a kind of guilty pleasure. Just as music enchants the ears, images tickle the retina, and massage delights the muscles, thought can bedazzle the brain. However, thinking is not diametrically opposed to non-thinking. Like all dual dyads, they are 2 sides of a complementary dynamic. We can engage in thinking without indulging in thinking. Wisdom is to know the difference. If our thought is informed by direct experience, we cannot go too far astray. One of the strangest dimensions of the Zen frontier is that duality, native to our home country, does not obtain. The normal division of the environment into such sensory mundanities as dark and light, hot and cold, wet and dry, is flipped 180 degrees. One startling Zen declaration is that, quote, water is not wet. This mental mode of intuitive ambiguity requires an attitude adjustment of a different order. It goes beyond simply seeing through the senses, which was the subject of the prior chapter. On a conceptual or a philosophical level, Zen challenges received wisdom by pointing out that where we see dichotomies and contradictions, they do not really exist. In the same way that the senses do not exist, at least not as one-sidedly as we think they do. We learn the rest of the story through unlearning these means in Zazen. So that's the introduction. Any comment or question around that? Shinjin? Did it disappoint?
No, it didn't disappoint at all, but it seems to dovetail right into the Heart Sutra.
Yep.
What we just chanted.
Exactly. So somebody else, I think this first time we should just bounce around. By next month, you probably have a copy and we can have a little more focused discussion. Makes sense?
Mm-hmm. It does.
Over to Fusats.
Yeah, Kayasa.
Sensei, can you play Deconstructing Your Senses, please?
Can I play it? Yes. My chops may be a little rusty. Okay, just let me read you the subheads. And again, if you find a subhead more interesting, and it's a very long chapter. Description versus experience. Sequence of senses in meditation. Confronting the resistance. And it goes through all the touch, thought, sight, and sound, smell, and taste. So confronting the resistance. No sense in emptiness. Getting in touch. And this first one is all about touch. Goes all the way through touch, the body putting up a fight, feeling change, sensing nonsense. Number B is thinking, brain, and concepts. So I'm positing the theory that we don't experience the senses in meditation as eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. Most people experience the body first in the form of resistance, pain, and legs, and so forth. The second one we confront in level of difficulty is thinking, the brain, and concepts. So the first one is the body sensation of feeling, touching, skin, flesh, bones, and feelings, meaning physical feelings. That's A. B is thinking, brain, and concepts. I think that's the second one most people run into, your busy monkey mind. Once you get comfortable in sitting, in other words, once the resistance of the body has abated, then you're confronted with monkey mind. The monkey goes berserk because you're not giving it much to do, facing a blank wall. So that's the second one we face right away, and that's a very deep one. So it goes on for page after page after page. I could read the introduction to any one of these if you like. At the end of thinking, by the way, the last subhead, I'll read you that one, the real world in Bucky words. In other words, Buckminster Fuller's take. C, A is, again, body, touching. B is thinking. C is seeing. For me, as a visually trained designer artist, seeing is predominant, and they say seeing is the predominant sense through which we get most of the sense data. Some people may be more attuned to hearing. Shinjen is a musician, so he may confront hearing before he really gets into seeing, you might say, as a level of difficulty or resistance. Seeing, eye and sights. Do you see what I see? You can't unsee that. Subtitles like that. Light and dark, dark and light. All about seeing what you're seeing with your true colors, seeing stillness and motion. Have you seen the dragon? Those kind of subtitles. And the next one is going to be hearing. And I make the capping point that we have this thing called sight, and then in Buddhism we have what we call insight. So that's another way of framing the ordinary everyday world of duality against that of non-duality. Sight represents this reality. Insight represents transcending or seeing into this reality. So D is hearing, ears and sounds. Listen to the music. Mary Had a Little Lamb, you know how that runs through your mind sometimes. Deal with that. Getting beyond noise to just sound, et cetera, et cetera. Listening to life, use the subset. Hearing space, sensing silence. Okay, and then the next one is smelling, nose and sense. Now, smelling and tasting are put toward the end as the least resistant. That is, when we sit still for long enough, they adapt very quickly. The other ones that we've just gone through, the four cardinal sensations, don't adapt very quickly, especially the mind, very stubborn. But smelling and tasting are chemical, and fragrant memories, intimations from childhood. Here's a good one on Montezuma's Revenge, time spent in Mexico. Smelling a conflict, stop and smell the incense, and so forth. And then tasting, tongue and flavors is F, that's, last. Chemical intelligence, tasting tastelessness, etc. Then it goes into something a little bit different, talking about speech, because the tongue not only represents taste in Zen or Buddhism, it represents one of the three, what are they called, three actions of body, mouth, and mind. So the action of mouth is speech, like loving speech, kindness, or the opposite. So anyway, that's the section on senses, and again, it's one of the longest, and Norm Fisher mentions it, that he found it very compelling, that much detail on what kind of transitional adaptations our senses go through when we sit long enough, still enough, long enough. So anything in there, John, anything in there grab your attention?
Yeah, since we're talking about a book and words and thinking, let's do thinking.
You want to go right to thinking?
Yeah, the intro to thinking. Maybe it'll help us think about reading books about Zen.
Yeah, which I recommend against in the beginning of the book. So thinking, brain and concepts. And here I'm naming the organ and its object. So eye and sights, ear and sounds from the famous poem, right? It's the organ and its object. So in thinking, it's brain and concepts. Brain is the organ, the concepts is its objects. Thinking is the second most resistant sense realm encountered in Zazen, mostly in the form of monkey mind, compulsive obsessive thinking. It re-emerges in full force shortly after we have overcome discomfort of the body. There's a spoiler alert there. You may, when you're concentrating on the body posture, find that you're not really thinking much. You're gritting your teeth and working through the body. So thinking comes to a stop in a way. But as soon as you get comfortable, and Zazen should be a comfortable way, it comes back with a vengeance. So it reemerges in full force, the struggle, the resistance, thinking mind, shortly after we have overcome discomfort of the body. In the traditional order of Buddhism's six sense realms, thought is positioned last for logically rational reasons, such as its relative complexity. In order to do justice to that reality, this section is a bit long, and that's an understatement. The thinking mind is the sense realm least amenable to unraveling, being the most gnarly and resistant to change. By the way, I've mentioned elsewhere that Buddha's disciples testified that the sense of hearing was the most amenable to unraveling. And it makes sense if you think about it, there's no real boundary in hearing. You know, he likened the senses to knots in a scarf, six knots in a scarf, and you have to untie them. And many of his disciples, the majority of them testified that the first one to unravel was hearing for them. Like the Bodhisattva of compassion hears the suffering of the world. Avalokiteshvara came to full enlightenment through the sense of hearing alone. Well, that's one of the background historical stories. The thinking mind is a sense realm least amenable to unraveling, being the most gnarly and resistant to change. We largely ignore the monkey for the present, like in our Zazen. We largely ignore the monkey for the present, like fast forwarding through commercials on television, paying strict attention to the other senses, our posture and our breathing. In Zazen, thinking is not of much use, but not much of a hindrance either. We mitigate its usual deleterious effect of running interference by focusing outward. We become transfixed on the unvarnished present sense surround, rather than indulging in conceptual fantasy. You may presume that thought would come first in Zazen, what with the rarefied stratum it occupies in the West, where thinking is revered as deep meditation. But in Zen, intellectualizing is regarded as limiting, though highly useful in other areas of endeavor. The discriminating function of the brain is not generally regarded as part of sensory awareness, but as the sixth sense in Buddhism. It lords over and distorts the other five. Thought, being the function of an organ, the brain responding to stimulus, as seeing and hearing are functions of eyes and ears, argues for inclusion as just another sense realm. The main distinction being that the brain is relatively isolated from direct interface with the outside world, unlike the other sense organs. It makes contact through them. The sense organs provide direct interface with external stimuli, as well as internal sensations. Data processing begins with the 5 conventional senses, but immediately engages thinking. The knee-jerk resistance of chitta seems to take forever to break down. Is that enough on that one, John? That's the introductory paragraph to this section on thinking.
I think the bell answered the question.
And Julie had a question. Chapter 168, did you say that there's a subchapter called Perception and Conception?
Yes. She said 168. Oh, embracing non-duality. Yes. Oh, she must have the index because she's got the number. So within that section, what was it again?
It was Perception and Conception.
Perception and conception. I'm sure it's here. I hope it's here. Yeah, here it is. Let me take a drink. We'll read that part of that. By the way, these are organized with scannable and subheading so that if you are sitting on the toilet, you can read a section and be done with it, and you can remember where to pick up next time. You can use a piece of toilet paper for your bookmark. So perception and we even thought of, John and I were talking about publishing books on toilet paper.
I won't touch that one.
It's the opposite concept of an edible book.
Oh dear.
Where you just pull the page out and eat it each time. Each page you read, you eat the page. And
The Dharma arising from toilet tissue.
that's right. Zen is disorienting in a creative way. So perception and conception. In Zen, we face the double bind of accepting that our experience of sensation, perception, and conception is in some wise delusional, and yet reflects reality, partly owing to built-in biases in favor of survival, which conforms to biological science. We like to believe that not all impulses and desires are based on simple selfish motives, but even apparently altruistic behaviors can be reduced to indirect strategies evolved to preserve the species. All that aside, we are individually confronted with the everyday koan of seeing through the delusional aspect of our awareness to the reality at its core. Part of the reason that Zen practice takes so long for any significant shift to occur in our awareness is the power of the monkey mind to resist this counterintuitive effort. Our faculties of conceptualization, reacting to events, past and present, pleasant or unpleasant, trigger a subtle but powerful interference phenomenon. Conceptual feedback interferes with primary perception, rendering the data that we receive from our senses even more distorted. Again, PTSD is an extreme example. So, as an aside comment here, I've referred to PTSD before as influencing the way a person may begin to experience a panic attack when there's really no present threat, but there's enough cues picked up subliminally in the environment that are similar to when one was mugged or attacked, that an automatic reaction sets in. This is a well-known phenomenon. But it illustrates the relationship of conception to perception and how conception ideas imprinted, firmly imprinted, can begin to actually affect our perception. This is also a Zen principle. Where there is no real and present danger, we still feel threatened. In Zen, we come to regard these seemingly inseparable arenas of awareness as worrywart partners in monkey business. Conceptions are initially born of raw perceptions, but they come to exert a retroactive, reverse conditioning effect on our immediate perception. We perceive reality as we conceive it, not as it actually is. Which is why we must transcend the skandhas as well as the senses if we are to see through the hardwired distortions stemming from the stew of conditioning, selective memory, and survival instinct. We may be forgiven for feeling like giving up in the face of such seemingly intractable intransigence. We seem to have no free will in the transaction. So this is followed by free will and karma, and if Chi would like us to go into that a little bit, a short section, we can read that.
Before that one, Chi, two questions. One from David E. Doss from Facebook. I'm interested in lousy excuses.
Okay, we'll take that up next.
Okay.
Chi, do you want to hear a little bit on free will?
Please.
Free will and karma. Those are the two I chose to.
You have a choice.
So much for free will.
What did you say?
Nothing sensei. Move.
I'm the Rodney Dangerfield of Zen teachers. I get no respect. Straighten my tie here. In free will and karma, in the liturgical service associated with Soto Zen, we chant the stanza of repentance. All my past and harmful karma, born from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, through body, speech, and mind, I now fully allow. Consider the phrase, through body, speech, and mind. Zen recognizes that most of our desires and resultant actions come from being incarnated in this physical body. I'm using the term incarnation here in its most general sense, that we are corporeal beings, not in the sense of Hinduism's reincarnation. This ancient doctrine posits a self-existent self or soul, Sanskrit Atman, transmigrating from one life to the next, discarding old bodies and donning new ones, much as we change our clothing. This is not Zen's principle of rebirth. Buddha did not find evidence for this belief in his direct insight, any more than we find the mind-body distinction of Cartesian philosophy in our Zen practice. Body and mind, matter and essence, physical and spiritual, are all co-arisen and interdependent in Zen. The three actions taken through body, mouth, and mind do have consequences, and not only in the limited sense used by politicians. Through their inevitable karmic effect. Buying into the reality of karma, or I could say the possibility of karma, is one of the keys to the original frontier. But the important point here is that the body is itself the root source of thirst, hunger, sexual cravings, and desire for creature comforts, as well as most of our mental and emotional needs, such as for safety and security. We don't just make this stuff up. Conceived of as independent of the body, the machinations of the mind, upon closer examination, are seen to be almost entirely in its service. Our mind clings to our body, and our body clings to our mind. Even this expression implies their separation. This again is the fault of language and not of the reality. The concept of free will seems necessarily in opposition to karma as popularly understood. What goes around comes around in the dismissive vernacular. Free will is usually opposed to fate, necessity, predestination, or God's will. The Zen does not deny the exercise of free will or consider it merely notional. Karma operates over Zen's three times: past, future, and present, the last being the concrete dimension in which we actually live, the only time in which we can take action. Karma's Sanskrit root means action. So a little bit more, a brief paragraph on karma and action. Taking action, in particular, intentional or willful, self-centered, motive-driven action, leads naturally to consequences of karmic dimensions for individuals as well as groups. Actions and elections have consequences, as we are frequently reminded and as we witness on a daily basis. Karmic consequences can be considered a special class, however, those that have lasting effects rather than the somewhat trivial results of everyday activities. Breathing, for example, breathing is something we do not do intentionally. But the consequence of not breathing means that we die in about 5 minutes. Whether that is good or bad is up to you to decide. Free will consists in the choice of actions that we elect to take in the present. Actions of omission as well as commission can result in significant, if unintended, consequences. If you can accept karma as an operating principle of existence and not merely a belief, the most you can do about it is zazen. If we find what we lack in meditation, we will not be creating undue karmic consequences, looking for satisfaction in all the wrong places. Is that enough on that? We had a question?
Sorry, yes. My impression of what you had just stated with the text, it seems, and I don't want to make it into a theory.
I think you can pull your mask down further.
Yeah.
Think of the microphone.
Okay.
I have both of my shots.
Free will, as phrased, sort of like at least the impression I have right there with the text,
Right.
seems to be in relation to zazen, as stated, and not necessarily strictly to the cushion, but zazen itself. Are you able to elaborate on that?
Yes, we have free will, according to Zen. You are free to do anything, as long as you're willing to face the consequences. If you're driving to work one day and you're sitting in traffic and you're sick and tired of it, you think you don't have any choice, you just have to do it. You don't have to do that. You can call in well. You can say, I'm not coming in anymore, I'm fine. See you later. Then you can quit your job and then go back home and face those consequences. So you actually have free will in every case to do whatever you want to do, as long as you're ready to face the consequences. Now, the only time in which you can act is in the present. And that's why it's always it's past, future, which are considered conceptual, and present, which is considered real, in Zen at least. So you don't say past, present, and future, as if they're all equal. But free will means you can take action in the present, but it does not necessarily change karmic consequences from the past. And so, but it's not predetermination. This is not, it doesn't project into the future. Whatever you do in the present, according to this theory, changes what can happen in the next moment of the future, the next present, emerging from this present. That can change. And there's Hotsuba Daishin, Dogen goes into this in great detail. Hotsuba Daishin's prostration to the attainment, establishing the Bodhi mind. And he makes the case that everything is arising, abiding, changing, decaying, and as Shana, the smallest particle of time. If it weren't, we could never be free of our karma. So if there's further study, if you want to follow up on it, the Buddhist position on where our actions tie into free will, to what degree, and to what degree we can affect our own karmic consequences and those of others. Our karma is bundled together. We share each other's karma. So what we do not only affects our own personal karma, but that of everybody around us.
You know, Chi, I saw that hand going up. I know you couldn't wait.
We have, remember where we have to go next.
Yeah, that's right.
So since I knew I was going to have a question about this, because this is the knot that I'm always trying to untie with regard to free will. It's interesting, right? I mean, it sounds like the where we're pointing with this is that Zazen gives us more freedom of action, right? It gives us more choices as opposed to being driven by the cravings that we might normally have.
Now, I'm not sure that freedom is the right word, but discernment, which is another word that you're concerned with a lot. You know, if you sit in Zazen, you gain discernment where, yes, I could do this or I could do this. But discernment or wisdom says, I'd rather do this, you know.
Yeah, I think I always get in the infinite regress, which is like, well, where did your motivation for sitting Zazen come from? Where does your sincerity come from? It comes from the past, right?
Right.
I mean, it comes from something that's already happened or something that maybe you hope will happen in the future, but it all comes, to me, it all seems like it comes from the past. And when we say we can do whatever we want to do, I would argue we always do what we want to do. Even when we do something we don't want to do, we do it because it beats the alternative. And the only way that we're aware of that is based on what's already plugged in here, you know, what the environment is plus what's happened in the past. And you know me, I get completely wound up in that. And I don't know that anything is going to pull me out of that.
From the view of psychology or psychiatry, one of the standards is that people's behavior, this goes back to transactional analysis, people's behavior, games people play and that kind of thing. People's behavior is mostly designed to maintain status quo. So I don't have to do anything to change. I don't have to, you know, that kind of thing. That's all, everybody understands that. But when you start sitting in Zazen, you wouldn't be sitting in Zazen if you were happy with the status quo, right? So you're sitting in Zazen because, as Matsuo Roshi would often say, something is missing. People go through life with something missing. Don't know what it is, we know it's missing, trying to find it. So sitting in Zazen, we assume that there's this underlying aspiration to arouse the Bodhi mind, or the urge to awaken and so forth. So we're not happy with the status quo. It's okay, you know, but there's still something missing, and I want to find out what it is. So in that sense, when we sit in Zazen, it's not so much that we gain any more free will. You know, a bull in a china shop has free will, but look at what it does, you know, or I'm not going to go into politics here. But, discernment means, yes, you have the free will to do any number of options, to take action on any number of fronts in any number of ways. But you can't ever be sure that what action you're taking is the right, correct, perfect action in every case. So you always have to be ready to accept the consequences. Fall down 7 times, get up 8, as Dogen says. You have to fail. And you can't learn unless you fail. And failing is painful. And you get down on yourself and you feel like a failure. But that's unfortunately, that's a necessary part of the process. So we can't have free will in the sense that we always know the right thing to do. We have free will in the sense that we are willing to take the chance, take the risk. And typically, Zazen is hopefully able to help us reduce our selfish, self-centered, self-directed, or obsessed motives for taking this action or that action. So when we take action in the midst of a social context, for instance, we may get to the point that we can actually do it for the most good for most people. But until we can discern the difference between my dog in this hunt and, you know, what's best for everybody, we can't take that kind of action. So I think that's the kind of clarity that Zazen brings about. Helps us to get to, you can't establish a causal effect there, but just by sitting still enough, long enough, and paying attention, opening up, embracing your own mortality, your own aging, sickness, death, all of those things, so forth. Come to terms where you're okay with it as it is. And so you can enter into situations where a lot of people aren't okay with it as it is. And you might be able to be the, you know, the head that is not losing its head while everybody else around you is losing theirs. Rudyard Kipling. something like that. But free will is, it's worth studying as to whether there is any such thing. And if there is, how does it function?
So next question, lousy excuses, and then we have some other questions for you. So everybody's lined up. Promise we're gonna get to your questions, folks. Thank you so much.
Okay, finding workarounds for your lousy excuses. So I think reading a bit of the introduction and then the first one, I don't have time for meditation, which seems to be the most common. Read a little bit on that. In this section, we will consider some popular notions about meditation, especially those that may discourage us from continuing with the middle way method of Zen. Zazen means just sitting, contemplating, yes, but nothing in particular. I suggest breaking that rule temporarily with some suggestions for dealing with negative attitudes. When using an application on the computer, we may run into glitches, situations we do not know how to handle in order to proceed. We turn to the documentation, go online to chat rooms, and one hopes find a wizard who can help us with what turns out to be a known issue. They have often been there and done that and can provide workarounds to get past the problem. Same, or at least similar, for Zazen. Zazen is simple, but no one would say it is easy. Like any method, such as aerobics, Zen cannot work itself, but must be worked. Most of the difficulty arises not from Zazen itself, but from our resistance to it. Resistance stems from preconceived ideas and expectations about how meditation is supposed to work and what it is supposed to do for us. There are many variations on this theme, too many to recount here. But if you see yourself in the pictures painted below, try the try this exercise that follows each example. Most of what you're called on to consider in this section amounts to an attitude adjustment regarding meditation and your resistance to it. The resistance to the way things work and disappointment when they stubbornly resist working the way we want them to is not limited to our time on the cushion. And then I take one example from real life. It's called the horse you rode in on. On the small farm where I spent my formative years, we had a barn and about 20 acres of fenced-in pasture, later planted in soybeans. We boarded horses and would ride them in the spring after they had wintered in the barn. A stallion that had been captured wild and was then tamed would occasionally kick a hole in the barn wall. Followed by the mare, followed by our gelding, the trio would run a merry race around the grounds of the golf course next door, paying special attention to the greens and occasionally trampling the flags. They did not endear us to the small town country club set. The golfers would return the favor by trampling our crops, looking for lost golf balls. One spring, my older sister was all gussied up in bright white shorts and top for a fashion photography session with my dad. Upon mounting the gelding, just as her leg was swinging up over the saddle, he bucked, sending her flying through a graceful arc above him, straight into the mud pond behind the barn. Obviously, he did not appreciate being saddled, let alone ridden. All he wanted to do was frolic in newfound freedom after a long winter of confinement. Understandable from a neckline point of view. Not so much from my sister's perspective, though she laughed uproariously, or my dad's, who did not find it funny. Zazen is like riding a horse along the unknown trails of the original frontier. It is literally the horse you ride in on. Like my sister or a cowboy on a cattle drive, you and your horse may not get along very well at first. You may want to go this way, but the horse wants to go that way. Horses have personalities, wills of their own, and they can be mighty stubborn. You may develop some saddle sores in the process. That if horse and rider together are going to finally bring the cattle safely to the end of the drive, every day you have no choice but to get back in the saddle again. Fortunately, after a while, you and the horse begin coming to accord. Eventually, it is as if you are both thinking and moving with one mind, but it is still a long way to the end of the drive. So it goes into attitude adjustment. And then I introduced the damn your lousy excuses. While consulting in retail design, I came into contact with a Canadian company called Dilex, D-Y-L-E-X, which turned out to be an acronym for, I am not making this up, damn your lousy excuses. Driven by contemporaneous definitions of success in business, they did not admit making excuses for failure. In Zen, however, success is preceded by failure, no excuses. During my tenure practicing Zen and propagating it to others, this phrase came to take on more relevance. It is so easy to find reasons why we cannot or will not do what we secretly know we need and want to do. Some of the more common ones and tricks you may want to try to work around them follow. They are all interconnected variations on the same theme. So I'll read a little bit from the first one. Quote, I don't have time for meditation. This is probably the number one reason most modern people claim they cannot do meditation. They imagine that the ancients had plenty of time on their hands in spite of having none of the technological time savers we enjoy today. But this was a known issue even in the early days of Zen in China. Then, as now, it can be attributed to limited views. Here's a quote. To live in the great way is neither easy nor difficult, but those with limited views are fearful and irresolute. The faster they hurry, the slower they go. This last charming expression may be a historical precursor to the more current, the hurrier I go, the behind it I get, from Alice in Wonderland, by Zen master Lewis Carroll. It's true that most of us seem to have little or no spare time these days, but Zen meditation will repay your investment in it with interest. By spending time in repose, you tend to be more rested, ready, willing, and able to do the right thing at the right time. And you tend to do it right. You save time that otherwise you would waste going off half-cocked or second-guessing yourself. In exploring any frontier, you have to bivouac once in a while to conserve your energy for the next portage. Matsuoka Roshi used to say, 5 minutes Zazen, 5 minutes Buddha. Half hour Zazen, half hour Buddha. But wouldn't you rather be Buddha all day? Just sitting in the posture is already enlightenment, as Dogen emphasized over and over again. It does not really require sitting for long periods of time. A little bit of Zen is better than nothing. Try this. See if you can get yourself to squeeze in your minute of Zen, apologies to John Stewart, on a daily basis, for however long. In short order, it will begin to work its magic. Most find it reasonable to sit a bit after waking and just before sleeping. If you do so for a month or two, you would detect a definite difference in your daily attitude. Others will notice too. Since the duration does not matter that much, you do not have to assign yourself a certain period that you must sit, otherwise feeling that you have failed. You cannot get this wrong. It will be interesting to see how long you can stand to sit there in the morning before giving in to the anxiety and hitting the panic button. When and if you begin to freak out, just give up sitting for now and go about your morning routine. After all, you can sit again tonight, just before you lie down to sleep, or maybe a bit over lunch. So no big deal. Even if you can sit for only a minute or two, or 15, give yourself a break on this. Then at night, same thing. Watch and observe what happens when you just sit there for a while, instead of immediately lying down to sleep. Or instead of whatever you usually do, watching TV or reading, which, by the way, sleep experts recommend avoiding altogether. Next time you get ready for bed, and the next time you wake up, just sit on the side of the bed for a few minutes. No cushion, no cross legs, no incense burning, nothing special. Just give yourself a few minutes for your body to assume the posture and for your breath to slow down. Your mind will soon follow, becoming calmer before you go to sleep, mitigating any insomnia you may suffer owing to stress. In the morning, it will serve to tamp down any anxiety you may feel regarding the things you have to get done that day. Each day you can keep track, morning and evening, see what happens. Keep a journal if you like. You may find that in the beginning it is difficult to just sit there for more than a few minutes. But if you don't make a mountain out of this particular molehill, you may find that next time you can be a little more patient. You may even find that you prefer sitting to lying down after a while, and that your issues around sleep begin to diminish. You may find yourself moving your sitting spot to a permanent location and sitting longer, a half hour, say. So the next one is meditation is too painful for me. It goes on and that kind of thing.
Thank you, David, for that question. Sensei, thank you for your teaching there. Our next question comes from David Tooney. He says, Sensei, can you discuss your treatment of Nin, cognition, Zen, page 78 from the book?
Oh, how does he have the book already? Are you sure? Nin? What is the subtitle?
It says Nin, cognition, and Zen.
I don't see that subtitle on page 78. And this book does not have I guess it doesn't have an index, so I can't find it that quickly. Can you tell me which chapter it's in?
I'm looking, 1 second.
Do you have the manuscript? Because the page numbers would be different in the manuscript.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't have the book, obviously. I have the manuscript.
Chapter title.
Hold on.
It must have been in one of the reading groups.
Mm-hmm.
Nen is a Japanese concept, I think. It probably adapted from China. It has to do, it's like a thought moment or something of that nature, where third level Nen is full of complexity, outer cortex, concepts, interconnections, categorizations, higher math, science, and philosophy, et cetera, et cetera. Second level Nen is like a step in, like to inner cortex maybe, where it's still dualistic subject-object, et cetera, but the labeling and the categorization is sort of fallen away to a simple level, more like a child. First level Nen is like brainstem lizard brain kind of thing, where it's just bare awareness. Still separation into self and other, perhaps, but not much cognition beyond that, or complexity, very simple. And then I think Zen proposes a zero level, where, as Master Dogen says, in stillness, mind and object merge in realization, go beyond enlightenment. So you could say that below lizard brain stem level, even the separation into self and other merges to a non-dualistic kind of singularity. Did you find it? We can go on to some.
No, the manuscript's hard to search.
Okay, I'm not sure where that is. If I had an index, I could find it. We'll have to skip that one for now. But next week or next month, let's go into that one. Find it. You'll have the book by then.
Thank you, Sensei.
Sorry about that. You'd think I would know where everything is. Here's one, a good one. I think not, therefore I am not. It's got to be in thinking. It's in thinking somewhere. But I'm not sure I can, find it quickly. Somebody else have something while I'm looking. Turn it back over to Fusan.
Mm-hmm. Again, folks, if you have a question, just do not be afraid to come off of mute or throw it in the chat. Those who are on Facebook do that as well. Oh, he found it. There we go.
Okay, the subtitle is first dash, second dash, and third dash level NEN, N-E-N. The very exclusivity of dependence on thinking comes at the expense of the mind's other powers. The intuitive trusting mind, Sanskrit bodhicitta, meaning combining both intuition and discrimination. Thinking itself inhibits deeper insight beyond ordinary thinking. The Japanese language offers up a tripart model of cognition based on a concept called nen. And this is a quote. These two kinds of actions of consciousness are both called nen, a term we may approximately translate as, quote, thought impulse. The nen alternate with each other from moment to moment, and we may feel as if they were arising almost simultaneously. But nen actions, hyphenated, that occupy the stage of consciousness come forth one at a time. Let us call the outward-looking action the first nen, and the reflecting action of consciousness the second nen. So these would be equivalent to the empirical method as sense data, and the internal part being what is called reflection. The second, so let me say that again. Let us call the outward-looking action the first nen, and the reflecting action of consciousness the second nen. The second nen, which illuminates and reflects upon the immediately preceding nen, also does not know anything about itself. What will become aware of it is another reflecting action of consciousness that immediately follows in turn. This action is a further step in self-consciousness. It consolidates the earlier levels. This is Dogen's merging principle. We shall call it the third nen. In our example, we have first the observation, second, the awareness of that observation, and third, the acknowledgement of ourselves becoming aware of the observation. So let me pause for a moment and say that Buddha's teaching from the beginning was scientific in that it's based on empirical method observation, but it includes the observer from the beginning. It's not an objective, so-called objective description of reality outside of an observer. The whole purpose and meaning and import of it is that you are included as the observer in these teachings. So after that quote, this formulation's first, second, and third levels of nen are analogous to high concept on the third level, less complex on the second level, and basic on the foundational first level. This model recalls the empirical method, contrasting external sense-driven information with internal reflection as two parallel tracks. It forms a rough correlation to physiological levels of outer cortex, inner cortex, and brainstem. All higher conceptions, such as Einstein's thought experiments, which I mentioned earlier in the text, would correspond to third level nen. The less complex cognition of a child and those of higher intelligent animals to second level nen. Primitive instincts of the brainstem, the so-called lizard brain, and lower intelligence organisms would correlate to first level nen. Zazen may be thought of as a process of regression in nen, from complex processes of third nen in the beginning, simplifying over time to second nen, and ultimately reducing to first nen. Another model for profiling Zen's process of unlearning. We turn away from intentional thought and return to natural thought. Then non-thought. Nothing lost, nothing gained in the process. Zazen plummets to zero level Zen, the very ground of awareness, supplanting thoughts of a trivial nature with the non-thought of enlightenment, which necessarily transcends ordinary thinking, encompassing all levels of nen simultaneously. Glad we found it. Hope you liked it.
Yep. And Sensei, I'm doing a time check.
Yep.
We have 3 minutes to the hour. So I would ask if you would like to have any final comments related to your the book release, and then we'll go into announcements.
Let me read just a little from Norm Fisher's introduction, so we're not just hearing my words today. The book you have in your hands will carry you along. Its author, an American who spent a long lifetime, practicing and wondering about Zen, writes with ease and seems to have thought through just about any implication, conception, or objection to Zen practice anyone could possibly have. Also, he spent many years studying with an important, if not so well known, Japanese Zen teacher, and represents that master's teaching eloquently and faithfully, which in itself would make this book well worth your reading. But there's more. To say something about this more, I want to sketch some historical background. Michael Elliston's teacher, Reverend Soya Matsuoka, like the other Japanese Zen pioneers in America, was born in the early years of the 20th century. He came to the United States in 1939. To leap across the ocean to America from Japan was, at that time, a far more enormous and daring undertaking than we can imagine from today's perspective, when people travel all over the globe, and far-flung cultures seem to know each other's business. Pre-war America and pre-war Japan could scarcely have been further apart, which raises a question: what compelled Reverend Matsuoka and his contemporaries to do this outrageous thing? To appreciate this, you have to understand the enormity of the year 1868 in Japanese history. This was the year of the Meiji Restoration, a massive political and cultural reorganization that lasted for generations, through which the Japanese undertook, with all their disciplined force, to end the project of trying to keep the Western barbarian influence at arm's length, an effort they were forced to give up when Admiral Perry's warships sailed into Edo Bay in 1853, and instead absorbed Western ways in order to surpass them. Zen priests such as Soya Matsuoka, who came of age in those days of cultural fulminance, couldn't help but question their tradition in light of the West. Studying with searching and critical eyes both Western religion and philosophy, as well as Zen, they felt compelled to revise, renew, re-envision. They intuitively seemed to understand that they could not do this freely within their own cultural context, that they needed to see more directly through Western eyes. And so the most lively and daring among them gave up their secure careers at home to live permanently in the West without any idea of how they would survive or what they would do. They were determined to bring Zen to the West, a Zen they knew they'd have to discover in the process. I point this out in order to indicate that though the Zen transported from Japan by Reverend Matsuoka and others was authentic and traditional, it was also a Zen intentionally torn free from its traditional Japanese context, and was therefore at the same time completely different. This new Zen reflected American values that these Japanese priests were drawn to: independence, creativity, iconoclasm, and personal experience, values that are indeed implied in traditional Zen literature, but were not necessarily evidenced in Japan at that time or anywhere else in Asia. In this sense, these men, for they were, sadly, all men, I don't know if that's sad or not, is that sad? Being a man, were indeed pioneers, Japanese Daniel Boones, frontiersmen not only of the original frontier, but of cultural and historical frontiers as well. Enter then the second Zen pioneer this book offers, Michael Elliston, its author. Like Reverend Matsuoka, Michael Elliston is perhaps typical of his generation, the generation of Americans that passionately and completely received Zen from the first Japanese teachers to come to the West. A lively and independent-minded person searching for something beyond the traditional Midwestern virtues in which he was raised, and not incidentally a creative person, a visual artist and designer by trade. And parenthetically, he mentions, it is astonishing how many of the first generation American Zen students came from arts backgrounds. Indeed, Zen was initially understood in the West as more art form than religion. Close parentheses. He encountered Reverend Matsuoka while he was a design student in Chicago, and he never looked back. And so he says, goes on, I hope all this is enough to indicate why this book isn't exactly what it appears to be, a book about the Zen tradition for new or experienced students. Yes, it is that, given its cultural matrices, post-Meiji Japan in 1960s America. It is more a record of two generations of seekers in two different realms of modern upheaval, two individuals who saw in Zen a path towards their own unique authenticity and individual vision, lived in response to uncertain times. Okay, there's one more paragraph. You can read it. So I hope that was a sufficient introduction to pique your curiosity. And I hope it's going to be the book reading group book choice Tuesday nights starting in June. But between now and then, this month in particular, I plan to emphasize this each month. And so I'd appreciate if you just send to my email account any questions you have that you want me to take up fourth week of March.
Gotcha, Sensei. Thanks for your teaching. Thanks for your writing. Again, in all some of the traditional Zen services, they always say all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the past, present, and future. We are so grateful that you're bringing the Dharma forward. So we, by Gasho, everyone, appreciate and congratulate you on this effort to continue the propagation of Zen into the now. Gasho Sensei.
I don't know what else to do.
Do what you do. And again, as always, just a few announcements. Again, we're so grateful to continue to be able to practice in the midst of COVID, in the midst of everything else that's going on. So we're so grateful to our consistent givers. And we so ask if you are not already one of those consistent givers that you'd consider becoming one, because that is what allows us to continue to keep the Zendo, the teaching, and supporting our teacher. So thank you everyone for that request. Upcoming this week, we have, again, a lot of sitting opportunities and practice opportunities. Please check out our schedule on the website. And I'm gonna allow Chishiki just to speak a little bit about an upcoming opportunity that's gonna be at the watershed this weekend. So Chi, sorry to put you on the spot, but you're sitting there. I had to use you at this time. Sure.
No problem. We're missing retreats in person, and I know we're in the middle of COVID, but we have enough space here, we think, to do a safe retreat for 3 to 4 people, where we're going to space out and wear masks and take temperatures every day. It's kind of late notice. We just got the information up, I think, last week. But we're gonna try to have a small retreat here if anybody signs up, and if nobody signs up, we're still going to have a small retreat here. So it doesn't matter to us. If anybody wants to join, feel free. We're about 2.5 hours north of Atlanta, and we're just going to do something real simple for anybody that's interested. I'm vaccinated. We're pretty careful otherwise, and I don't know if anybody's interested and tired of sitting by themselves, come on up.
Thank you, Chi.
It's gonna be Thursday night until Sunday midday, and then we're doing more retreats later in the summer. So I can't remember the months that we chose.
July and September.
What is it? July and September. So it doesn't conflict with other retreats that are going on within the STO and ASZC network. But so if not this weekend, some other weekend. Look forward to seeing anybody that's interested. Thanks.
And if you haven't been to Watershed and you live here in the Southeast, it's really it's a marvelous sort of magical place. And thanks to Chi, Kyle, who is running the place, making it available to us. It's a wonderful Dharma asset. I just wanted to add to what Fusatsu said. Any of those of you tonight who wanted to ask a question, weren't able to. Many of you are already doing weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly dokusans with me. Many of you are doing weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly dokusans with me. So just bring up your questions in that context. And any of those of you who are not doing that, just access my email address, and you and I can strike up a conversation. I don't do a lot of writing in response to email, but we can set up an appointment where we can have a Skype or Zoom or a FaceTime or just a telephone conversation. Okay.
Thanks, Sensei. The other item that we have up next Sunday, and Chi, I don't know if you can incorporate this into your retreat, but we have a guest speaker, John Slattery. He's going to be talking about embodying Zen as everyday life, practical lessons from the founders and the contemporary teachers. Kanzan, that will be a great talk. I love when he speaks, so please do join us. Is there any other announcements? All right, we're going to go ahead and do our closing verses. So we'll get started there. And again, everyone, thank you so much for your presence and your continued practice. We appreciate leaning into the Sangha, especially during this time. So we're so grateful for each and every one of you. Gasho.
Beings are numberless. I vow to freedom. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dark gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to freedom. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dark gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to freedom. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dark gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it.
Gasho, everyone. Again, Sensei, thank you for your teaching. It's so great to see you. And again, thanks so much to Kayasak, Cosettes, and everyone else who essentially helped Sensei with this book and this marketing. Have a great week. Gasho, everyone.